Hi, everybody. We'll get on with the next session now. I'm C. Mohan, an IBM fellow at the IBM Almaden Research Center. I'm here to introduce the next session, which will be on big data technology landscape. We'll get to hear from a couple of technologists, a marketeer, and a venture capitalist. These people represent some of the leading companies in the big data space, and as a technologist who has spent more than 3 decades in the hardcore database space, I'm really looking forward to a great session here. Thank you.
So Mohan, first, thank you very much for introducing us and introducing the panel. This is an amazing area. UBS wrote a report, the bank wrote a report at the end of 2013 entitled Big Data Equals Big Disruption. And they call this the most transformative IT trend of the next decade. And I'm sure all of us couldn't agree more with that. Viewing this from the large lens, in 1990, we had hardware. You added software to hardware, you made that programmable, you created the software economy, which is pervasive today in everything. In 2010, we started the zettabyte era. Effectively, we added data to software, and now we've started the data economy, and in the next 25 years, we'll see the data analytics economy that merges out of that mating. Driven by forces like larger, cheaper storage capabilities, faster, cheaper memory, greater processing power, faster, wider networks, and of course, open source. So Ty has dedicated a whole day of tracks to this, and we'll take our next 30 minutes to look at 3 specific areas, being database, data management, and visualization. And we have a great set of speakers here to address that on the panel. First being Mike Hoskins, CTO of Acteon, Alan Saldich, who's the VP of Marketing of Cloudera, and Emil Efren, who's the CEO of Neo Technologies. So I'm going to put my bag down. It doesn't have to be that heavy today. Okay, so let me start off by asking the panel, what do you view as the most disruptive forces in these areas today, and specifically, how are you disrupting the market by what you're building? So Mike, do you want to start us off?
So I agree that this is the most disruptive period I've ever seen in software technology. You know, in a word, at first we worried about big data, now it's analytics. You can tell that in the conference today. That's what I believe. It's all about the analytics. Really advanced analytics, really predictive, simulating type analytics. I mean, we're on the cusp of being able to predict the future. That is the most disruptive thing any of us will experience in our lifetime. So that's a huge opportunity. The challenge is that the waves and waves of data, the scale and complexity is something we've never seen before. This is not your father's data warehouse. This is back-breaking change. In fact, it will break the back of the legacy software industry. And so the big news, the highly disruptive news, is that much of the software that we know, that we love, that we think is fantastic isn't. It's very old software that was written 20 and 30 years ago, single-threaded in many cases, and isn't going to scale in the age of data. What are we doing about that? We saw that trend early. We've invested over $200 million in the last couple of years to acquire a fully next-generation modern software, hyper-parallelized, super-scaling, covering the entire gamut of being able to capture, analyze, and act on data at any scale. So yeah, you're right. This is about as disruptive as anything you could imagine coming.
I think simply put, the combination of Hadoop, which you've heard about already, combined with ever cheaper and more powerful hardware, just means that our customers and anybody using Hadoop and using it for big data can do things today that were completely inconceivable even a few years ago at a far lower cost. And I think the thing that's really surprising to a lot of our customers is that you can start with one idea in mind, whether it's advanced analytics or whatever, and with the same cluster, the same Hadoop cluster, you can use it for a pretty wide range of applications or uses within an enterprise that impact storage, archiving, data warehousing, databases, all with this one new, essentially infinitely scalable and quite inexpensive platform. So I think it's just that combination. There's a lot of complexity behind that, of course, but simply I think that's the nub of it.
Thank you, Mark, for this opportunity for a commercial break. I appreciate that in the introduction of the session. So disruptive forces, I think we take a little bit of a contrarian view to many of the speakers at a big data track, a big data panel, in that we don't really think a whole lot about big data. On the other hand, we take a lot of time to think about connections in data, and we think connections in data is something that is very, very fundamental and very, very important. And it really comes back to actually fundamentally how we as human beings think and how our brain is structured. It turns out that if you double click on a human brain, it's actually a network or a graph, right? We have neurons with synapses connecting those neurons, which builds up a big graph or a big network, right? It turns out that connections in data is what we use when we try to understand things. I think what the human brain does when it tries to understand something that is unknown, an unknown concept, you understand it by trying to relate it to other known concepts. You guys are trying to figure me out right now, and if I tell you some data that is attached to me, like first name Emil, last name Ephraim, age 35, that tells you something about me. But if I tell you how I relate to the world, the fact that I grew up in Sweden, the fact that I've been to India 23 times, 23 times. The fact that I'm married to Madeline, I'm father of Nomi, I work at Neotechnology, I live in the Bay Area, all of that is what gives me color, is what makes you understand me, and that's all about connections. So we think that connections in data is this completely transformative fundamental thing. It is what makes data actionable, it is what turns it from information into knowledge, and that's what we fully embrace. And we think that if you build tools that completely embrace connections in data, that is very, very, very disruptive. So that's my take on that.
So, so scaling, combining to create inexpensive platforms, connections. Where are we on the productization implementation of all of this? Are we at the first inning? You all have leading customers today because you have case studies on your websites. What are they doing with it, and where do you think we are in terms of trying to get this from where we are today to the broader markets? Emma, why don't you go back the other way?
Great question. I think so. We are exactly at the point now where this technology, the technology to embrace connections and work with connections, is starting to become democratized. Right, so if you look at many of the big brands in consumer web, not all, but many, even most, like the Googles, the Twitters, the Facebooks, the LinkedIns, et cetera, of the world, like if you double click on them, like the key competitive advantage for them was actually exploiting connections. That's the difference between AltaVista and Google, right? AltaVista downloaded their entire web. Inside of every single document, there was links between them that they didn't use. Google took those links and ranked the entire web according to the graph connecting the documents, and that's why they won, right? The same thing is true that's why LinkedIn dominated Monster.com. That was the key thing that PayPal did differently to all the other people trying to do online transactions. They took a payment graph view of the transactions, and that's why they managed to do fraud detection. But all of these guys, they had to build the technology themselves from scratch. Right? And now there's an ecosystem of graph vendors. Of course, I'm one of them, and since I'm the only one on stage, I'm going to only be talking about my technology. But there's like an entire ecosystem with vendors now that provide tooling that allows you to exploit connections in data. And I think that's a super exciting point in time for this type of technology.
And where do you think, so do you have examples of companies that have implemented this now and an application or two that they've done?
Tons, right? So there's hundreds of Fortune 500 companies using these types of technologies today. One example is Walmart, which is a customer of ours. As I like to say when I pitch esteemed colleagues to yourself in the venture capital industry, we dominate 100% of the Fortune 1 company. 100% market share. And they use Neo4j for online recommendations, right? So you can take a disconnected view of a purchase history, like isolated record, isolated record, isolated record, or you can take a graph view of it and say that purchase history is actually relationships between people who buy stuff, consumers, and the products that they buy. And the products are organized in hierarchies, etc. And if you structure it in that way, you can do collaborative filtering and online recommendations, which is a very powerful and impactful thing. And that's one example of what people are using graphs for.
Okay, great. Alan?
Yeah, I think where we are in adoption is changing very, very quickly. So 2 years ago, I joined Cloudera. The technology was quite raw, very difficult to use, batch only, didn't really have any management tools around it, and was really used primarily by the web companies around Silicon Valley and a few other early adopters. Today, it's completely different. Of course, we're marketing a complete solution called Enterprise Data Hub, which includes security and management and a lot of other things I won't bore you with today. And that's been adopted by hundreds of, about 350 paying enterprise customers right now. But of course, it's open source software, so there are thousands of companies. I would bet almost every company of any size has a Hadoop effort somewhere in their basement. And depending on the company, there are different degrees of implementation, and they're using it for a variety of things. A lot of things for advanced analytics like recommendation engines. That's very big in retail and online. In banking and the credit card industry and kind of mainstream financial services, a very popular use case is to rationalize or optimize data warehousing infrastructure. So rather than continuing to spend endless millions of dollars every year to expand a data warehouse, you can look at it a little bit more carefully and move selected data and workload out of that infrastructure and onto Hadoop at a much, much lower cost, and then free up the data warehouse to do really what it does best. This is a very popular use case. Then there's just what we kind of refer to as an active archive, the idea of rather than deciding what data is important to keep or not keep, just keep all the data. Hadoop is so inexpensive. You can use industry standard servers. You no longer really have to make a big decision about whether it's worth it to keep 1 billion patient records online for 5 years or 10 years. You can just keep them, and then over time become more and more sophisticated about the way you analyze those records for patient care or optimization or whatever your business is. So those are some simple examples that are quite popular.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mike?
So your question is, are we still in the first inning? And I think, sadly, in some ways we are. And that's one of the challenges for people in the room. It is time for big data to grow up. We call it big data 2.0, and for it to be industrialized and to leave behind Stone Age tooling like MapReduce and move to visual frameworks and highly optimized engines that allow you to scale up and scale out effortlessly without the crudities of some of the last 5 years. So yeah, it's a challenge. We spoke about it this morning in our keynote. It's time to act faster. It's time to look more aggressively at new technologies. We have customers who are already doing this across the board. Amazon Redshift, you've probably heard of that. That's 100% OEM of our next generation columnar database technology. Retail analytics, we do a lot with Home Depot, and Evernote's a big customer of ours. You probably heard of Future Group, some of you in the audience. Future Group, biggest retailer in India, is a customer of ours. Yahoo uses us to do world-class, amazing ad optimization. The fruits, the advanced analytic fruits are there. But I think the immaturity of the big data ecosystem is a little surprising to me, a little challenging, a little disappointing. And I think it is time for us to pick up our game and look at more modern infrastructure and newer stacks and higher up the stack solutions than just coding in the swamps down below.
To the next question, Alan, do you want to address that?
The Stone Age? Well, I didn't know I was in the Stone Age. That's good. No, I think you probably have a point, but I would say maybe not quite the Stone Age. I think maybe what's changed is, MapReduce is one of many tools you can bring to bear on these kinds of infrastructures, and it's great for some large-scale computational things that just require an incredible amount of number crunching. It might be, analyzing hundreds of millions of photographs or doing physics calculations or whatever. But for everyday business, you can't really wait around for half an hour or 3 hours for a result. And so there are other tools that we and other companies in the space have developed to enable, for example, interactive SQL, which is hopefully not a Stone Age, even older than Hadoop, but somehow not Stone Age. Any application that speaks SQL can then be used via Impala into data stored in Hadoop. Of course, there's things like Spark, which is very exciting. There's a company out of Berkeley called Databricks, which is commercializing Spark to enable stream processing and in-memory analytics. And so there's a wide range of things. We're really in the platform business. We don't make applications, so I'm not here to decide which is the right analytics or graph engine. But as far as a data platform, or what we call an enterprise data hub, we think it is the future because it is so scalable and so flexible, and you can really do just about any of these things in this system. So whether it's Stone Age or not, I don't know, but maybe.
Well, fair enough. So in terms of the maturity or immaturity of all of this, what do you think the ecosystem needs to accelerate this faster? I mean, Are we missing players from the market? Are we missing skill sets? Are there impediments that you've run into that you just didn't expect to see along the way? I mean, all three of you, I think.
I'll just speak for us. I mean, I just think it's changing so fast. I think if you'd asked that question, a year ago, I would have said some of the things I mentioned earlier. Well, security, people complain about the lack of security, the lack of management tools, training. Where do I find a data scientist? How do I learn Hadoop? But now we have, just speaking for Cloudera, over 1,000 companies in our ecosystem that are partners, and that includes, I think, about 150 now who have certified their products to work on our latest release. So almost any mainstream analytics or visualization or BI tool that you might be using is probably certified, and so that's very different. And then so your user community can, if they like SAS, if they like MicroStrategy, if they like Tableau, if they like Platfora, go on down the line, they can just continue to use those applications and just point them at Hadoop, and they can now secure the data in new ways. So I think those are a lot of the obstacles that are being knocked down almost monthly. I can't even keep up with it personally. So I think that's really changing quickly. It's hard to really put your finger on it, but that's a big difference.
Okay. Mike, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I think there are some well-acknowledged gaps in the big data infrastructure. I hinted at them earlier. I'm a huge fan of Hadoop. We've been partners with Cloudera for 5 years, but I meant what I said earlier. Google wrote the white papers, 10 years ago. They sort of moved away from MapReduce as the single only way to process data. A couple of years after those white papers, Michael Stonebraker was interviewed the other day saying, I can't believe people are still using, it's like COBOL in the 60s, you're writing low-level code, there's no metadata, it's just not good. And so yeah, there are, Yarn is very important. Yeah, I just saw that lightning round. I congratulate the data torrent guy. Yarn is gonna let 1,000 flowers bloom. By the way, we announced before you, so yeah, about a minute after Yarn was announced on Hadoop 2.0, we announced the world's first fine-grained thread-level parallel data flow engine, fully Yarn certified, running on Hadoop, so that you can do extreme high performance at design time and runtime performance out of your analytic workloads. I think SQL on Hadoop is a really hot topic this year. Sadly, people are using Hive. It's not even fully functioning. Its performance is abominable. I think we're going to see some exciting developments coming from you guys.
Not everybody's using Hive, though.
Pardon?
Not everybody's using Hive.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be a very exciting summer. We've got some things coming, SQL on Hadoop, and I know you guys are doing some things. So yeah, I think it's time for vastly better software and infrastructure to step up to bat, so people can get some price performance out of the platform.
Emil, do you want to talk about what could help accelerate this?
No, actually, unfortunately, I think I agree with both of these gentlemen, which is not a position that I like. I like to disagree on panels, but unfortunately I don't now. I think it's a very natural evolution. I think that what's impressive with the entire Hadoop ecosystem is that there's so many diverse players that contribute to it. And I'm sure your favorite name up here is in Hortonworks, right? But I love the fact that there are so many, there are Hortonworks, there are MapR, and there's a gazillion people contributing to the Hadoop ecosystem. And it seems to be reasonably messy, but also reasonably well architectured in that people can layer tools and more usability on top of it. I think everyone agrees that MapReduce sucks ass. It's a horrible, horrible environment, but it's produced a whole lot of value, and it's taught a generation how to think about distributed systems. And now, as an industry, we're layering more maybe fit for purpose, more special purpose layers on top of that, which I think is just very good, and it's a very natural evolution.
So in talking about Hadoop, so Hadoop is so basic to this industry that, if you pick up Big Data for Dummies, you'll see a lot written about Hadoop. Actually, I was surprised that Neo4j is even in Big Data for Dummies, so maybe that shows how early you started with your process. But talking about that, there's perhaps misconceptions about how all this will play out. And one of the questions I did want to ask is, will Hadoop complement the data warehouse? Does it replace the data warehouse? What are sort of the thoughts about how this is going to come together and work, and where is Hadoop's best place? Let's say in the EDW. How does this work in terms of storage and database? What's the overlap? And maybe, Alan, we can start with you, and then Mike and Emil, you can fill in.
Yeah, so this has been a somewhat, if you follow this sector, it's somewhat controversial. But really, we think it's pretty simple. We do not believe that Hadoop is going to replace data warehousing. Data warehousing is kind of both a technology and a concept and a set of practices, really. We, in our customer base, what we see is kind of what I described earlier: people building a new thing, a data hub, next to a data warehouse, and then thinking about which tool is right for which workload. And they interoperate, by the way. So, for example, we have connectors to Teradata, and customers, there are many Teradata shops out there, can move data to and from their Teradata systems into and out of their Cloudera systems just fine. And then, they might use the same tools to analyze data stored in both systems. But the fact is there is an overlap. And I think what the big argument is, how big is that overlap and how fast is it growing? There are some people who would say Hadoop is really just a place to store lots and lots of data, and whenever you want to do interactive advanced analytics, you need to bring your data up into a data warehouse and do the work there, and then you can put the results back in your Hadoop cluster. That we certainly don't agree with. With Impala, just to be clear, there's a lot of disparagement of MapReduce up here, that's fine. Impala is an alternative to MapReduce. So I just want to clarify one thing. So there was a chart earlier, it's actually a Hortonworks chart, but it does a decent job of, MapReduce, Impala, or some other SQL and Hadoop system. Search is another way to interact with data in Hadoop. So we think of them as just a series of engines or tools that can be brought to bear on the data stored in Hadoop. Sometimes you do want to use MapReduce. Other times you just want to type a search, just like you do in Google. The degree to which it replaces part of your data warehouse infrastructure is really up to the customer. We do have some customers who have replaced data warehouses, but I would say so far that's quite rare. In general, that's not what they want to do, and that's certainly not what we tell them to do up front, because that's a big move.
Yeah, I agree with that characterization for where we are right now, but I think it's a fast-moving ecosystem. If you plot the graph, the line of where we're going, I think it is a violent collision between traditional concepts of EDW and what's possible in a big data platform. I kind of think of HDFS as the killer app here that's eating the data, and eating the world. And data has gravity. That's a really interesting concept. Data has gravity, and as more and more of it gets someplace, more and more of the compute must rush to the data. And so as HDFS becomes a data lake, I think it's really unfair to describe it as a data lake like it's some ETL ghetto where we do our low-value stuff and then we do our real work someplace else. Nonsense. You're going to do your work where your data is if you have high-performing analytic software. And so I think we're rushing headlong into a pretty exciting future where more and more processing occurs in these modern frameworks, and that's where your data lives. That's where you're going to do increasingly all your interesting workloads. I know that's a multi-year statement, but I believe that firmly.
It's a very interesting concept, and maybe Emma, I'll let you add to that. So the old model, the old framework was you move the data to the compute. As you talked about now, the new model is you move the compute to the data, and the data has gravity itself. Emil, do you want to add any comments to that?
To that or to the previous question?
Either one. Go ahead.
Well, okay. I unfortunately agree with most of what you were saying about the previous question as well, so I'll take the new one. Well, yeah, I think that is a really important trend. I think it's pretty obvious data's gravity, and it's huge, right? So we're not going to take all that data and move it to where we have compute cycles. I mean, we have to do it the other way around. And I think we see that a lot, and I think that's one of the, maybe that differs our technology from your technology in that we're primarily an OLTP data store. So our customers use us, either instead of Oracle or MySQL, or side by side with Oracle and MySQL, right, in a polyglot persistence architecture. And that kind of makes it obvious that the data is going to be there, and the processing is also going to be there, right, because there's no shifting of it back and forth, right? So I think that when it comes to moving data to compute or vice versa, I think that is a little bit more appropriate of a question for the OLAP side of the family, whereas we primarily belong to OLTP side of the family.
Alan, of course, Cloudera is at the center of this. Do you want to add anything to that concept?
Yeah, we firmly believe in that. We talk about that paradigm shift a lot. I think it's a pretty new idea out in corporate America and around the world, and the customers that we visit. People are still getting used to this idea. Most of our customers have built their systems over the last few decades, and they've accumulated data and compute in whether it's geographies or business units or divisions or around specific applications or workflows, and they've just run into the dead end of having silos, if you want to call it that, or piles of data around their companies, around their data centers, and it's proven difficult or impossible to answer the questions that they really would like to answer. And that's what's driven a lot of this, I think, idea. Boy, we'd really like to have all our data in one place if we could analyze it with the right tools, if it was secure, if we could handle the governance, if we could handle the lineage questions, if we could make sure we can conform to HIPAA or whatever other regulations we might be subject to. But that is definitely an exciting idea. And once the light bulb goes off with people, once they kind of get the concept, and we do it oftentimes by showing them just a photograph of an old data center, or not even old, I mean a current data center, and a picture of something like the Google data center, which just looks completely different. That really helps them kind of get the picture. And then once they start thinking about this as one giant, we don't personally like the term lake, but hub, as I described, but whatever you want to call it, one place where you have all your data, and then you point your different analytic tools there, and don't move it around anymore, because every time you move it, you lose some data, you leave it behind, you aggregate it, you sort it, you strip it, you clean it, whatever. If you leave it all in place, then not only do you have the original high-fidelity source data, you have whatever transformations or roll-ups as well, all in the same place. And it really changes the way people work with data and their ability to answer the kinds of questions they want to answer.
Okay, great. So let me ask you, on the visualization side, just sort of lightning, what's the most exciting thing? Everybody loves the eye candy. What's the most exciting thing you've seen in visualization lately? Whether it's in companies or university labs or something you're working on.
Yeah, it's an area that fascinates me. I run something called the Innovation Lab at Acti, and I get to experiment with this kind of stuff. And I'm experimenting with something that I call auto-discovery. It's expensive to ask questions of data. You need experts, you need data mining experts, you have to mediate through them, you need SQL experts, you have to mediate through them. What if your data could talk to you more spontaneously? I'm going to steal from Emil a little bit here. We are the primary investor in a very exciting startup called Sparkle City that has a triple store, a semantic web kind of graph database called Sparkleverse, and I've started playing with it, and it's fascinating. If the atom of data is the relationship, the link, the amount of spontaneous analytics, relationship analytics, you can get out of that is pretty amazing, and the human visual cortex is strong at recognizing patterns, and what if the data sort of threw up, I probably shouldn't use that word. What if the data sort of spontaneously emerged in an interesting network analytic, and you could say, wow, what does that mean? Let me probe in here, let me dive in. Who's this outlier? Why is somebody on here at 2 a.m.? Why are they the same person who met in the coffee shop? And so I like Emil's idea. I think relationship analytics and the visualizations, the amazing, and it's not just eye candy. What if they were dynamic? What if they were alive? What if you could drill into them? So that's a very, analytics is about to go like this. In so many different analytic techniques and methods and outcomes. And I like that one. I love the visualization side of the story.
Alan?
I'll give a quick plug to one of our partners called Zoom Data, which is a really cool young company that has integrated a lot of the big data tools around Hadoop and does real-time, or maybe interactive is a better word, analytics, SQL search into Hadoop, and they have amazing demos and videos on their website. It's not maybe quite as sci-fi as some of that stuff, but for more conventional business kinds of questions, it's a very powerful and elegant tool, we think, and a lot of our customers get very excited about it.
Yeah, this is maybe a self-centered answer, but I very much agree with what Mike is saying. I think we've been blown away time and time again when we see the impact that graph visualizations have, not just on the geeks who is our primary audience, but the actual business users, right? Where time and time again, our customers come to us and they say that we implemented this, and then we showed the graph visualization of the database to my business sponsor, who's a person who's never heard the word third normal form or ER modeling or tables or anything like that, right? And it made sense to them. You could say like, well, actually, suppliers aren't connected in this way to over here, and it made sense to them just visually from looking at the data in a graphic perspective, which has been very, very powerful. And in our latest release, NeoFJ 2.0, which is available now from neofj.com, we actually ship visualizations by default. And the impact of that has just been phenomenal, which just, again, I think speaks to the fact that human cortex is just very, very good at picking up visual cues on information. So very self-centered, but like graph visualizations, I think, are mind-blowing.
That's great. So we thank you very much, and particularly thank the panel. We are very optimistic, as you can tell, all three of us. We're very optimistic not only in the companies that are growing today, but the startups that we yet haven't seen. And I'm sure everyone on the panel would love to hear about that. And I'd love to fund some of you if you want to come to me with your ideas. Thank you very much for having us here today.